Welcome to the Society of Wetland Scientists webinar series. We're so glad that you could join us today. My name is Jennifer Favela, and as a volunteer with the SWS Webinar Planning Committee and Certified Professional Wetland Scientist, I'm pleased to be the moderator for today's webinar. We're excited to share this SWS e-learning experience today for all of us to stay engaged virtually and earn continuing education credits. So today's topic is Just Add Water, Restoring Shallow Wetlands for Wildlife, and it's being presented by Lisa Wolford. Lisa began her career as a wetland scientist in Pinellas County, Florida, after graduating with a bachelor's in marine science from Florida Institute of Technology. And she later entered the nonprofit sector, working in the land conservation industry after spending a decade in museum education promoting the value of wetlands and aquatic ecosystems at the John G. Shedd Aquarium in Chicago. And she now works to advance ILM environment's work in the wetland restoration field as Director of Business Development. It's a position she's held since 2019. So welcome, Lisa, and thank you for taking the time to present with us today.
Well, it's so great to be here, and thank you so much for having me. This process has brought me back to my wetland days, which was at the beginning of my career. And any of you Floridians on this call who maybe lived in Pinellas County in the early 90s know that it was very much there was a development boom. And so regulations back then certainly were not as robust as they are today, although obviously there's concerns in that area. But it's just really, really exciting to see how far wetland science has come, and frankly, 30 years now. The other kind of little personal piece I wanted to share during that transition is, when I moved to Chicago and came to the Shedd Aquarium, 2 million visitors come through that site every year. So there's a lot of opportunity for impact. And wetlands were not on the Midwest radar. It wasn't part of any exhibit. It wasn't part of any educational program. So it was also, really exciting to be able to kind of blow that horn, if you will, and get people to start understanding the value of wetlands. So, I feel like this presentation almost brings my career full circle in my love of wetlands. So thank you for having me. So we're going to talk about Just Add Water, Restoring Shallow Wetlands for Wildlife. And this is really a restoration journey, talking about a wetland scrape. And you have to wait a second for the slides to kick in and want to advance. So give me a second here. But I thought before I delved right into that, I just also wanted to share with you my personal connection to wetlands. This is where I live. This is my backyard. And when my husband and I decided to leave Chicago, we had 2 young boys, and I just wanted to raise them in nature. And I really wanted to raise them in a wetland environment. And my dream came true, and the things that we get to see here at this site, especially with migrating birds and grebes and mergansers, herons, eagles have made a comeback in the past 5-6 years. We have osprey now, and one of the most exciting things we get to see every year is the migrating white pelicans that travel up the Fox River. This wetland is off the Fox River in northeast Illinois, and we get to see these amazing birds come through in the hundreds through our property. And so I don't know, I just felt I wanted to share with you my personal connection with wetlands, because it really has added great value to how I live and how I was able to raise my family. Um, yeah. So if you want to come see with some white pelicans, give me a call. You can sit and have a beer. Okay. So let's get to the project. Trying to get there we go. So just to start off a little bit, we are ILM Environments. Our main office is located here in Northeast Illinois. We're about 45 minutes from Chicago. A lot of lakes, a lot of wetlands in our area. We've been growing, and so now we have offices in Wisconsin, Indiana, and North Carolina as well. But one thing that is a little different about ILM is that um, we are a completely holistic ecological restoration firm. ILM stands for Integrated Lakes Management, and 35, 6, 7 years ago, we started as a lake management company, but came to quickly realize, everything is interconnected. So how do we help you, with water quality with your lake if we're not looking at the watershed or adjacent wetlands? So we take a holistic approach. We have aquatic biologists who work with lakes, ponds, wetlands, terrestrial ecologists that work with prairies and woodlands. Um, our consulting team, that's the science behind the services we provide, have great backgrounds. And one of the things we're always looking for is new technologies. We can't rest on our laurels of this is just how it's always been done. Especially what we're really seeing is, you know, the community's desire to move away from chemical applications as solutions and try to get into more preventative ways of managing the environment and looking at ways to really kind of, hey, predict what's coming down the line so that we can um, get ahead of what we think is coming. So really to try to prevent. So that's who we are. We're a staff of about 50, so a pretty small company, but we have a big heart. Okay, so our objectives today is to understand the importance of wetlands in species conservation, which I will be speaking to the choir about that. So we're not going to talk a whole lot about that, but the purpose of the project we're talking about was to create habitat and primarily for threatened and endangered species. And we're going to walk through the process of a wetland scrape. And very much at the heart of this project was the use of our amphibious equipment. So we're going to talk about the value of amphibious equipment in restoring wetlands. And I would say to you, once we started to build our fleet of amphibious equipment at ILM was when our wetland restoration program really took off. So the wetland scrape that we performed, this would have been in 2023. The client was the Kane County Forest Preserve District. Um, so located pretty much just west of Chicago. So it was their property, and the project was engineered by Hay and Associates. And we do a lot of work with Hay and Associates. They're really out of the box thinkers, and we really enjoy working with them. ILM does not have their own engineering staff, so we either are working on projects that have been engineered and permitted, or we will approach a project with an engineering firm as a partner, and we love working with Hay and Associates. So the property is called Pingree Grove. So this is a forest preserve district in Kane County, Illinois. So I know every state manages their public lands differently, but these are county-owned natural areas. And so we have a really amazing forest preserve program throughout Northeast Illinois, which is really fun. And Pingree Grove is your, typical marsh, your typical, frankly, degraded marsh, cattail monoculture, pretty much, that had just kind of been there for a while. And you can see the flow of water coming from this area right here is a pretty busy highway. And the flow of water runs through this wetland. And the wetland was just filling up over time to the point that there was really very little open water left. And the site was had traditionally been used for some endangered reptiles and threatened birds. And so getting that open water habitat back was the goal of this project. It was two parts. One was performing the wetland scrape itself and getting that 2 acres of open water back. And then the second part was to create a sediment trap right here by the road to prevent or slow down the process of that wetland filling in over time. So wetland biodiversity was definitely, the prize here. And, historically we had great species, black-crowned night herons, nesting sites for sandhill cranes, nesting sites for turtles, as well as migrating birds. And, just the diversity was diminishing. And so inviting these guys back was what we were after. And I'll say here now, unfortunately, this is, for me, one of the most dissatisfying parts of being a contractor. You finish your job and then you pull away and you stay in touch with the client, but you're not intimately involved with the site anymore. And Kane County is not really sharing species comeback because many of the species are protected species, and so they're kind of keeping that to themselves for now. And one of the major creatures that they were focused on, which we can speak about, is the yellow-throated blackbird. This is a pretty uncommon migrant in our area of Illinois. It's a state-threatened bird, and it arrives sometime in March and then nests throughout May and June. So this was definitely one of the target species for this project to bring back to the area. So this project was actually proposed way back in 2017, and I imagine many of you can relate to the process of going through the engineering, going through the permitting, going through the grant writing to secure funding for that project. It can take a decade or more. So, this had been on the wish list for quite some time for the Forest Preserve District. And, 2023 was the magic year. The project was slated to start August 17th and end at the end of September. And the reason being, we had to work around breeding season for marsh birds and then brumation of reptiles and amphibians. So, we didn't want to be working in the wetland when, these guys are burrowed down and asleep. We need to give them the opportunity to kind of move out of the way. So I would say one unique part of this project was how incredibly short this window was to complete. And for those of you in the restoration business, if you get 2 weeks of heavy rain and now you're working in a mud pit, things could have gone, south pretty quickly. So I would say that short window was definitely on our radar. So we were watching the weather very closely. The other interesting part of this project was the bid actually called for the use of amphibious equipment. So we started collecting amphibious equipment probably 10, 12 years ago, and mostly because, and I'll touch on this again, we were finding that frozen conditions, which we typically rely on up here in the northern Midwest to, mobilize equipment, we just weren't getting the consistent, reliable frozen ground to bring heavy equipment out into an area like a marsh. So we were missing out on work because we just couldn't execute it. So we started looking around and went down to Louisiana and said, well, it's pretty marshy down here and they don't get winters, and started to research out amphibious equipment. And now we're finding that this is part of more and more frequently part of your bid spec requirements, and that other contractors are certainly starting to build their fleet of amphibious equipment as well. So yes, in order to qualify for this project, we needed to have an amphibious excavator to do the work. So the press release went out on August 15th. We started mobilizing our equipment, and August 17th, the work began. So right on time. And this is the project. Here's the wetland scrape area. The picture before perhaps isn't hugely telling, but we were starting to see, we could visibly see this wetland filling in with cattail. And then here was the 2-acre wetland scrape area. And if you notice, there's no road leading out there. So how are you going to mobilize your equipment? You'd have to mat this whole area and to pull out a traditional excavator. And so that was really the limitation. This whole area was soggy and mushy, and hence the call for the use of amphibious equipment. We were very fortunate with this project to be able to keep the material on site. So there were 2 stockpile locations right near the wetland scrape, and this was really, really important to be able to stay in that super tight timeline. So we didn't have to go far to deposit the material, which was great. Often with this kind of project, we're trucking it out and taking it to a disposal site, which significantly adds to cost as well as time. And then the second part of the project, which Hay and Associates were smart to consider, was now adding this settling pool or sediment trap to the area. If you recall, the water conveyance came right through this road, right? There's a ton of ag upstream. So by creating this sediment trap, which was very easily accessible, you can get to it with a traditional excavator. They can come in and dredge this area every 5 or 6 years instead of having to go through the major expense and headache of coming out and scraping this wetland, every 20 years. So it was a very, it was a smart addition to this project. So here is a list of equipment, most of the equipment that we used in this project. So you can see here in this picture, we actually own 3 amphibious excavators. We mobilized 2 for this project. The hopper barge was used to, load up the cattail material, and then that barge would get pushed to shore and the material would get unloaded. We had a marsh master handy, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then a long reach excavator and a skid steer for just moving the material over to those spoil areas. So this is the first amphibious excavator we had on site, and don't tell me how this tradition began, but we like to name our amphibious excavators after rappers. So this is Scoop Dog, and if you're on the inside, we just refer to him as Scoopy. Scoopy is 21,000 pounds, has a horsepower of about 50, 27 feet long and 12 feet wide. And the bucket capacity is 0.3 cubic yards. And one thing to think about is, the bigger the bucket, the heavier the material, then the larger, more robust engine you need. So all of that goes hand in hand. So 0.3 cubic yards per bucket is what we would get out of Scoopy. Ground pressure, and this is the key, the ground pressure of this amphibious excavator is 1.08 psi. And to give you some context, a traditional excavator weighs between 50,000 and 100,000 pounds and would have a psi of 5 or 6. A 200-pound male wearing flat shoes has a psi of about 5, and a 130-pound female wearing flat shoes, that was important when I Googled, heels make a difference, is 4 psi. So, the fact that this machine, has less ground pressure than a standing human is pretty impressive. And that's obvious because the way the weight is distributed and over that track system. Now, the one downside to Scoopy is being such a large machine, we have to hire a service to transport it. So you're not as flexible with your mobilization and demobilization, and it adds to the cost. And it's simply because the machine is so big and the trailer is so wide. We don't have trucks robust enough to haul it, so we have to hire out for that one. Then the second excavator that was part of this project is Dr. Dredge. So Dr. Dredge, just to also mention, in case you're interested in wanting to get into the business, Scoopy is a Wilson base. So the pontoons are made by a company called Wilson, and we did get this out of a vendor in Louisiana, and then we put a Bobcat E50 cab on top. Dr. Dredge is a little bit different. It's a Water King base, and Water King is based out of Sweden. So, yeah. So now you're paying for delivery across an ocean. We had a few kind of issues in the beginning and getting their experts to work with us to make repairs was a little challenging. But what was so exciting about this Water King base for us, you can see the pontoons in the picture at the bottom, is that they hydraulically retract. So this machine can skinny up into 8 feet and widen out to 12 feet. So that gives us a lot of flexibility, right? So if access is really tight, we can skinny it down to 8 feet, get out to the site, and then widen it to 12 feet to give us more stability. And it also skinnies down to allow us to transport this machine ourselves. So, our Ford F-150s can haul it. Obviously, the driver has to have a CDL, but this machine just gives us a lot more flexibility. So the engine and capacity of the bucket's about the same as Scoopy, but the long reach has a little bit of a longer reach at 19 feet. So these two machines were the powerhouses behind this project. And then, nothing special. We used a hopper barge to load up the cattails. The nice thing about this scrape is the goal was to restore depth to about 3 feet, and that's about the depth of a cattail ball. So, we monitored it along the way, but it was pretty easy math-wise to keep an eye on the objective here. And this hopper barge can haul about 2 to 3 cubic yards. So it actually filled up pretty quickly. So here you can see the setup. We've got, Scoopy on shore, Dr. Dredge out in the water. Dr. Dredge would fill up the hopper barge, push it toward shore, and then Scoopy would either unload it and let it drain or unload it directly into a skid steer that would haul the material up to the stockpile site. Now, when we didn't have Scoopy available for unloading the hopper barge, if it was dry enough, and toward the northern stockpile it was, we were able to just use a long reach excavator to unload that hopper barge and, put it right into the bucket of that skid steer and then haul it up to the stockpile area. This is a little video of, now that looks, on that particular day, this is Scoopy that was out doing the work, but, this is what it looked like. So you can imagine, that hopper barge filled up pretty quickly. But what you really have to think about here is that before amphibious equipment, we really had to wait for that water to freeze over. And to get a traditional excavator out there, we need between 18 inches and 24 inches of ice to withstand the weight of traditional equipment. So, this really is sometimes the only option when it comes to getting out to these remote sites. Let's go back. Now, another option for us is, which we didn't wind up using on this project, but we use often when we're doing wetland restoration, is using a marsh buggy. It's called a Marsh Master. This also came out of a vendor in Louisiana, if you're looking for one, and a slick sled. And the Marsh Master is great. We use it for hauling because it can go pretty fast, and it can get that slick sled, which is carrying material, to that dump site a little faster. So we kind of had this on call if we felt like we were running out of time and we needed to, up our speed, but we didn't need it. But I just wanted to point it out anyway, because when it comes to wetland restoration, it's a really valuable piece of equipment. Again, ground pressure is super low, so there's no soil compaction, no sinking here. And then the slick sled is actually something we had made, so it's proprietary, and I'm going to show you a little bit on how that works. I hope you can hear me okay over the music. This is a different site. It's in Lake County, Illinois. And we were hired to open up conveyance. Water was backing up onto a road, and there were actually some fatalities. And so this county really needed to get water flowing through this wetland again. And so we were able to get out there with an hope you can still hear me. But you can see with the slick sled here, it's hydraulic. And so it is able to dump itself. And so we did not need another piece of equipment to unload the slick sled. So it's a really versatile piece of equipment that's helpful with wetland restoration. Sorry, I hear the music was really loud. Okay, so so we're working on pulling this material out, and we would bring it up to the stockpile site, and that material was left to dewater overnight. And the reason being is that if there were any reptiles or amphibians that were living in that muck, we wanted to give them the opportunity to make their way out. So we would leave the material to dewater, and then every morning we would walk the site and look and make sure that there were no creatures present. If we did, I think we ran into one endangered reptile during this process, and we had to halt all work and wait for the county biologist to come out and retrieve the animals. So that was one opportunity for delay, is if we ran into threatened or endangered species. So this is the beginning of one of the stockpile, and we often get asked, well, gosh, you know, this is kind of cattail mass, like, does it really grow anything? And we did seed and mat, and you know, so when we're looking at this area here, right, got to keep in mind that the material that was pulled out of the wetland has a pretty significant seed bank of undesirables. So that's something to think about. So when we went back and checked on it earlier this year, this is what we saw. So the cattail mass certainly has the capability to grow vegetation. Unfortunately, the native seed did not have a chance against invasive thistles and other invasive species. So, you know, it might have been a better idea to, you know, put a cover crop down and maybe let the invasives present themselves and herbicide them for a few seasons and then seed. Or this really needed much more robust stewardship to you know, combat the thistle. Okay, so part two, I'll go through it quickly. So the second part was adding the settling pool or sediment trap, whatever you'd like to call it. Again, this was upstream of the wetland scrape. And first step, we just had to get in and remove a bunch of trees. There was an obsolete culvert and berm running through this area that was pulled out. That's the old culvert. And then we were able to start digging the sediment trap. We could have used traditional equipment here. Having the amphibious equipment is always a plus. It gives you a little bit more flexibility to be able to work from the water, but the site was nice and dry, so we could have used a traditional equipment. That's Dr. Dredge working from the land. And part of this was of this project was also adding a riffle, and basically the purpose of the riffle was during high flow periods. This riffle could trap debris and also work some oxygen into the water to help with water quality in the wetland. And then during low flow, there was an area for water to trickle out over here. So designed for both. And then obviously the project gets seeded and matted when we're all done. And the good news about this project, for those of you in the restoration business, you know there's always a challenge, you know, whether it's weather, whether it's machinery breaking down. You wind up changing the scope of the project due to unforeseen circumstances, and we had absolutely none of that. You know, as I mentioned, if that machine breaks down, you know, maybe the track falls off or the hydraulics break, you know, that can take that machine out of commission for a couple of days. We do have our own mechanics and we send them to the site when a machine breaks down, but you know, it's not uncommon. So we typically try to build that into the timeline a little bit. But in this case, you know, it was smooth sailing all the way. So it was perfection. So before we move on and take questions, I'm just going to touch on one more project that we did last summer. So this is another wetland scrape where the bid called for amphibious equipment, but this one was very different. This was not a habitat project. This was a compensatory storage and wetland nursery project. So this is the wetland scrape area right here. And we needed a little bit more storage. Water was flowing through this area pretty quickly and, you know, adding a lot of sediment to this lake. So we added this wetland scrape, which you can see has sort of a series of cells, which I'll explain to you what those are. And then this scrape, we dug out a conveyance to connect so it could drain into this lake, which was called Third Lake. We did use our amphibious excavators to excavate out this wetland. However, in this case, we did have to put down matting, and we used a Terramac truck for this one. So it's a truck with tracks, but the disposal site was pretty far, so we needed to use a Terramac truck, which can kind of move at a kind of a nice pace. So that's the machine we use to haul off. And then you'll see here, after we scrape this wetland, we put down this this mesh. And the purpose of this mesh was simply so that once the Forest Preserve District, this property is owned by the Lake County Forest Preserve District. Once they started growing emergent plants, they had a little bit of more secure footing to be able to get out into the wetland to harvest plants. And then each cell had kind of a rip-wrap perimeter, again, for access and solid footings so people could walk into the site. So there's the scrape out there. We also cleaned out this conveyance a little bit. As we know, with riverine systems, we had a lot of sediment accumulated here, so that was dug out as well to help with flow. And this is the completed project. So each cell would get deeper and deeper to accommodate different types of wetland plants. Justin's saying, I don't see your presentation anymore. Is that the case?
I'm not seeing it on my end, Lisa.
When did it disappear?
That is a great question. Maybe a couple slides ago. We just want to make sure everyone's seeing what you're describing because it sounds so interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to wait to hear from you guys. It's on my screen.
All right. Well, just feel free to keep talking about it, and then we'll jump into some
Yeah,
questions.
I think, what we can do is I can share you. That was my last slide anyway. I'll share with you the slide deck, and if people want to take a look, they can look at it that way. So I still have internet connection, so I'm not sure what happened there.
It's all
So I think
good.
at this point, we can open it up for questions or discussion.
Absolutely. So I didn't mention earlier there is a Q&A box. If you have questions, which they are coming in, Lisa, you can drop it in there and we can see. Oh, apparently they can all see it on their end. So I really
Oh, good.
appreciate, just not on mine. But we do have some questions, including, so is the sedimentation of the cattail wetland driven by upstream disturbance, or is it just a natural process that you're trying to alter to create a more limited valuable habitat type?
It's both. So once that sediment starts to flow in and it becomes desirable for cattail, right? So we find that here with lilies as well. Like when you have a lake or a pond or a wetland, they just naturally fill in over time. I mean, that's sort of what happens. In urbanized areas, they're going to fill in at a much faster rate. So once that wetland reaches a certain depth, the cattail are able to move in at a pretty quick clip and just take over that area. So it was a combination of both restoring depth that wouldn't be as desirable for cattails and then getting rid of those cattails that had moved in.
Is there a desirable water depth to prevent that regrowth?
Yeah, so
Like
in this
maybe,
case, yeah, in this case, the goal was 3 feet. I would say for cattails, if you could get it to 4 feet, that would be much, much better. But cattails and lilies like that really shallow, mucky environment, once there's too much standing water, um, they're not adapted for that.
gotcha. And were you mostly pulling the cattails out by the stalks or the root balls is one of our questions.
Yeah, that bucket is going underneath and pulling it up from the bottom. We also have grapples, and it just depends. Once you get started, if you find out they're getting pulled out pretty easily, you could even move to a grapple attachment that just plucks them out. So we usually start with a bucket and assume that they're rooted very well. But often, especially in this project, they came out really easily.
That's great. And let's see, what was the mesh material made of?
I
Is one of
cannot
our
answer
questions.
that question. I don't know. Yeah, I was thinking that myself. It looked to be plastic, but I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know.
Fair enough. That's a fair enough. All right. So what is the daily operating cost of these amphibious excavators?
Ooh, well,
Are
those are trade
you ready for the
secrets.
numbers? Tell us your costs. What are the inside secrets? Um, if you
Um,
don't have the exact number, I mean, I'm sure you don't want to keep it, you don't want bad weather to take it down. It'll be costly.
Well, I will tell you this, and I should know. So thank you for stumping me. We have another If you go on our website and there's a page that says specialty equipment, and our smaller amphibious equipment is about
Mm.
$2,200 a day with an
Wow.
operator. So I would imagine that the larger ones are going to be, 28 to 3,000. Um, and we break our mobilization and demobilization costs out separately from our daily operations because if you're super far away, it's going to be more expensive than, if you're 2 miles down the road. But um, I can get back to you on that, but it's going to be between $2,000 and $3,000.
Gotcha. A pretty penny there. So our
Yes.
next our next question, will the scrapes require continued maintenance to remove sediment, or does the design of the scrapes and excavation try to minimize the rate of sedimentation? So basically, is maintenance required, and if so, how often?
So the cool thing about that sediment trap that we talked about is that um, that's going to trap the sediment first, right? So, I talked about the source of sedimentation was road runoff and agriculture. So now that they have a clean slate, we can now go back and do sediment studies every few years to say, okay, listen, that sediment trap, right, which is grabbing that sediment first, is filling up every 6 years. So now you
Hmm.
can budget to say you're going to do you need to budget for a small scale dredge every 6 years. And we typically say when a water body is about 30% full, um, you should start thinking about dredging. So at the same time, we can go back out and also measure sediment accumulation rates on the scrape area itself, because it will naturally fill in over time, just based on decomposition of material, right? So, but I would think that they're not going to have to scrape that area again for a good 20, 30 years.
That's great. And maintenance every 5 to 6 years, I guess, depending on what's upslope.
Right, what's
That's really
happening in
not bad.
watershed. Yeah, and the nice
Yeah.
thing, and we build these sediment traps more and more. Um, it really is the economic way to manage your sediment accumulation. You build them in a way where they're easy to get to. You don't need special equipment to, do the dredge for them. So, if you can spend $6,000 every 5 years to do maintenance versus, $300,000 every 20 years, it's a good investment.
Absolutely. All right. So let's see. Do you know what the existing biodiversity in terms of birds and reptiles at the site is?
Um, I know it was low.
Mm.
So I can't say offhand. And honestly, the client kind of has been keeping that information close to the vest because of um, the sensitive nature of some of them. So I know that they do have a monitoring program in place, and hopefully at some point it'll become public knowledge. But it's been 2 years, so we would
Mm.
expect, at least from the migrating bird perspective, to see some good success there.
Yeah. And this kind of circles back a little bit to the question before, but how often do you anticipate retreating this area? And if so, will you retreat the same area or go for an adjacent site?
Well, my recommendation would be to keep this area as it is so we can really
Mm.
keep an eye on how it's behaving over time. Um, this project did not call for introducing additional biodiversity. So, we're
Mhm.
hoping nature will do a favor and bring us in some more diverse wetland plants. Um, hopefully there was some sort of seed bank in there. Then we see that all the time, once conditions become favorable to like pickerel weed or arrowhead, we see those plants just emerge on their own. So,
Naturally
uh,
revegetate
yeah, I think that's the hope for this
over
site.
time.
Yeah.
Nice. Have you ever considered herbiciding to remove cattails in open up areas, at least initially?
Yes, we do that. I would say with 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 a lot of our sites, right? So we will go in. It often just depends on the budget, right? So
Mm.
for us to go in and herbicide cattail and then mow the duff, whether we're able to draw down the wetland or wait for good conditions, um, that's going to be a far cheaper option than using the amphibious equipment. So we'll back into these projects based on budget, based on timeline, and based on the overall objective. I mean, honestly, a lot of people just want their cattails mowed down for opening up their view. They're not really all that worried about biodiversity. So
Yeah,
herbiciding them and mowing them is the easiest way to go with that. So there's definitely options for cattail and Phragmites to herbicide and mow. And one of we have, it's called a wicking bar that we put on that Marsh Master. So we can just drive over it with that Marsh Master and it's wicking um, the cattail. And we find we're using probably half of the herbicide that we had to use when we were using spray
wow,
guns.
that's
So
great.
economically and ecologically, it's been a much better way to go.
That's great.
Yeah.
Um, and then we have another question here. Have you had experience using the wetland scrape in meadows dominated by canary grass? And is there an optimum depth to excavate?
Um, we haven't with reed canary or Phragmites, um, because the rhizomes, rhizotomatus, right? The rhizome root system is so dense.
Hmm,
It's much more difficult to dig out. We can, but it's slow. So again, typically,
hmm,
economics say go ahead and herbicide it. Now, Wisconsin would love to see us figure out how to do a chemical-free eradication because they are very strict on chemical applications. So there's all kinds of cool attachments for these machines. And so, when we talk about innovation, um, you know, are there other attachments we should invest in to try to get at that challenge? So it's on our radar. We haven't figured it out yet, but stay tuned.
okay, we will. All right. And then we have a couple questions here. Did you conduct any bathymetric studies or have some existing maps that you used before undertaking the excavations? That's one of the questions.
We didn't because the wetland was pretty much topped out. Like
Hmm.
there was no standing water um, to map out. Um, and I do not believe we performed. The bid did not call for a bathymetric after, but that would be a great idea because if you're seeing certain depths are allowing for natural reestablishment of native wetlands, it would be good to have that data. But we were not asked to do that. But That would be a
It would be
great
neat.
idea. Yeah.
Um, and then we have a comment here. Love the hopper barge and slick sled. Have you considered cutting holes in the bucket to drain water with each scoop so you're not like hauling that heavy water? You said what? I know, hard to think of cutting, a bucket. I guess they've done that in Connecticut.
Okay. Well, thanks for the idea.
Some
Thanks for the
strategic
idea. I
holes in
think
the buckets.
right, right. Well, truth be told, I have a shovel with holes in it, so when I go out and remove sediment accumulation from my area, I get it. It's much easier than a solid shovel. Yeah, that's something I'll bring back to the team. Obviously, the grapple is great when we can use that because you're pulling from above and the water's draining
Right.
out. But um, thank you, whomever you are, for the idea. I will pass that idea
Well,
down
we'll
the
thank
line.
Roger Wolf for that question.
Thank you, Roger Wolf from Connecticut.
Wonderful. Well, we've answered a vast majority of the questions. There were a lot of questions, and apologies, I didn't see your presentation on my screen, but apparently everybody else did. So,
Good.
not apologies, I got that short. But thank you so much for being here. I believe we have some additional slides to put up here, but we are proud to recognize our sponsors of our webinar series for 2025, which is Davy Mitigation and SWCA Environmental Consultants, as well as RES. We really couldn't do this without our webinar sponsors, and we encourage you to go to their websites and check them out. And if you're interested in being a 2026 sponsor, please feel free to reach out to SWS or myself. We can get you more information. We also have on SWS webinar series, we list current job postings. There are currently 14 postings for individuals with a range of professional experience. So you can find more on our website. And then we have an upcoming webinar, which is November 20th, 2025. You can check out our website and social media channels to learn more and register for any upcoming events. And please don't forget to complete the emailed survey that will be sent to you after this webinar to receive a certificate of participation and provide feedback on our webinar series. The webinar planning committee is very interested in everyone's input. So thanks again for an exceptional presentation today, Lisa, and our audience for participating. Have a wonderful day and stay well.
Thank you.
Bye. Welcome to the Society of Wetland Scientists webinar series. We're so glad that you could join us today. My name is Jennifer Favela, and as a volunteer with the SWS Webinar Planning Committee and Certified Professional Wetland Scientist, I'm pleased to be the moderator for today's webinar. We're excited to share this SWS e-learning experience today for all of us to stay engaged virtually and earn continuing education credits. So today's topic is Just Add Water, Restoring Shallow Wetlands for Wildlife, and it's being presented by Lisa Wolford. Lisa began her career as a wetland scientist in Pinellas County, Florida, after graduating with a bachelor's in marine science from Florida Institute of Technology. And she later entered the nonprofit sector, working in the land conservation industry after spending a decade in museum education promoting the value of wetlands and aquatic ecosystems at the John G. Shedd Aquarium in Chicago. And she now works to advance ILM Environment's work in the wetland restoration field as Director of Business Development. It's a position she's held since 2019. So welcome, Lisa, and thank you for taking the time to present with us today.
Well, it's so great to be here, and thank you so much for having me. This process has brought me back to my wetland days, which was at the beginning of my career. And any of you Floridians on this call who maybe lived in Pinellas County in the early 90s know that it was very much there was a development boom. And so Regulations back then certainly were not as robust as they are today, although obviously there's concerns in that area, but it's just really, really exciting to see how far wetland science has come, in frankly, 30 years now. The other kind of little personal piece I wanted to share during that transition is, when I moved to Chicago and came to the Shed Aquarium, 2 million visitors come through that site every year. So there's a lot of opportunity for impact. And wetlands were not on the Midwest radar. It wasn't part of any exhibit. It wasn't part of any educational program. So it was also, really exciting to be able to kind of blow that horn, if you will, and get people to start understanding the value of wetlands. So, I feel like this presentation almost brings my career full circle in my love of wetlands. So thank you for having me. So we're going to talk about just add water, restoring shallow wetlands for wildlife. And this is really a restoration journey, talking about a wetland scrape. And you have to wait a second for the slides to kick in and want to advance. So give me a second here. But I thought before I delved right into that, I just also wanted to share with you my personal connection to wetlands. This is where I live. This is my backyard. And when my husband and I decided to leave Chicago, we had two young boys, and I just wanted to raise them in nature. And I really wanted to raise them in a wetland environment. And, my dream came true. And the things that we get to see here at this site, especially with migrating birds and grebes and mergansers, herons, eagles have made a comeback in the past 5-6 years. We have osprey now, and one of the most exciting things we get to see every year is the migrating white pelicans that travel up the Fox River. This wetland is off the Fox River in northeast Illinois, and we get to see these amazing birds come through in the hundreds through our property. And so I don't know, I just felt I wanted to share with you my personal connection with wetlands because it really has added great value to how I live and how I was able to raise my family. So, yeah. So if you want to come see with some white pelicans, give me a call. You can sit and have a beer. Okay. So let's get to the project. Trying to there we go. So just to start off a little bit, we are ILM Environments. Our main office is located here in Northeast Illinois. We're about 45 minutes from Chicago. A lot of lakes, a lot of wetlands in our area. We've been growing, and so now we have offices in Wisconsin, Indiana, and North Carolina as well. But one thing that is a little different about ILM is that we are a completely holistic ecological restoration firm. ILM stands for Integrated Lakes Management, and 35, 6, 7 years ago, we started as a lake management company, but came to quickly realize, everything is interconnected. So how do we help you, with water quality with your lake if we're not looking at the watershed or adjacent wetlands? So we take a holistic approach. We have aquatic biologists who work with lakes, ponds, wetlands, terrestrial ecologists that work with prairies and woodlands.